You think Rome gave you straight roads and stone arches? You're wrong. In 1901, a group of sponge divers pulled a lump of corroded bronze out of a shipwreck, and inside it was a machine that shouldn't have existed for another 1500 years. Here's the question that's going to follow you for the next few minutes. If that machine was possible, why did it disappear? And what else got lost with it? Picture this. You're standing in a museum looking at a chunk of green metal the size of a shoebox. It doesn't look like much, but X-ray scans later revealed more than 30 precision, cut bronze gears packed inside it, some with teeth smaller than a grain of rice. This wasn't a toy. It was a calculator. Why does that matter to you specifically today? Because every phone in your pocket, every watch on your wrist runs on the same basic idea this object used 2,000 years ago, gears translating one motion into a prediction about the future. You just assume that kind of precision engineering is recent. It isn't. And the gap between when it existed and when we caught back up to it is longer than the entire history of the printing press. So here's the trap. Either the ancient world had engineers who were, in some narrow sense, ahead of their time, or something else is going on, something stranger and honestly a little more unsettling. Let's go back to the shipwreck. A Roman cargo ship, likely hauling looted Greek treasure, sank off the island of Antikythera sometime around 60 BCE. It sat on the seafloor for almost 2,000 years before anyone touched it. When divers finally brought the bronze fragments up, nobody knew what they were looking at. For decades, the object sat in a drawer filed away as unremarkable. Then, in the 1970s, a physicist named Derek de Solla Price got access to it and ran early X-ray imaging on the fragments. What he found didn't fit the story anyone had been telling about ancient technology. Rows of interlocking gears, a differential gear train, the same mechanical principle used centuries later in mechanical clocks, tracking the position of the sun, the moon, even predicting eclipses years in advance. Think about what that actually required. Someone had to know the length of the lunar month down to a fraction of a day. Someone had to translate that number into a precise ratio of gear teeth, then cut those teeth by hand in bronze with tools that had no electricity behind them. One wrong tooth and the whole prediction drifts off by years. It didn't drift, it worked. Wait, predicting eclipses, not observing them after the fact, calculating them ahead of time using nothing but bronze and mathematics. Here's where it gets strange. This wasn't a one-off miracle. A research team led by Tony Freeth at University College London spent years running high-resolution CT scans on the fragments in the 2000s and 2010s, and they found something almost worse than a lone genius invention. The gear ratios matched known astronomical cycles with startling accuracy, which means whoever built this wasn't guessing. They were working from an established mathematical and mechanical tradition, a tradition with the named techniques, probably a workshop, maybe students. So where's the workshop? Where are the other machines? That's the first loop I need you to hold on to, because we're not done, not even close. In 2005, a fresh round of imaging picked up something even the original researchers had missed: tiny inscriptions covering the mechanism's bronze plates. Thousands of characters of ancient Greek so small they needed magnification just to be read at all. It wasn't decoration, it was instructions. A user manual cast directly into the machine, explaining what each dial meant and how to read it. Someone expected other people to actually operate this thing, which means somewhere there were other people who knew how. You'd expect a civilization capable of building a bronze astronomical computer to have left behind an obvious trail of similar machines. It didn't. The Antikythera mechanism is, as far as anyone has ever found one of one, no sketches survived, no manuals, no second example from any workshop anywhere in the ancient Mediterranean. Now hold that thought next to this one. A Greek engineer named Heron of Alexandria, working under Roman rule in the 1st century, built something called an aeolipile, a hollow sphere mounted on a boiler with 2 bent nozzles. Fill it with water, light a fire underneath, and steam shoots out the nozzles and spins the sphere. That's not a curiosity, that's the basic operating principle behind the steam engine that 17 centuries later would trigger the Industrial Revolution. Heron didn't just build it once. He wrote it down in a book called Pneumatica, along with dozens of other devices: automatic doors triggered by fire, coin-operated vending machines, self-trimming oil lamps. This wasn't science fiction to him. It was a catalog of things that already worked. So why didn't Rome build an economy around it? The historian Moses Finley argued that the answer isn't a lack of imagination at all. It's an economy so dependent on enslaved human labor that there was never enough financial pressure to replace people with machines. A steam spinning toy is a curiosity in a world where labor is treated as free. In a world where labor is expensive, it's a revolution. Rome had the second invention. It never had the first condition. So here's the twist you need to sit with. It's not that Rome and the Greek world it absorbed had technology ahead of its time. That phrase assumes progress is a straight line and that anything early on that line is an anomaly. It isn't an anomaly. The real story is that ancient engineering knowledge was never as stable as we assume knowledge is today. It lived in workshops, passed master to apprentice, recorded in single handwritten copies that existed in exactly one library, sometimes exactly one scroll. No printing press, no backups, no redundancy, which means the difference between humanity has steam power and humanity forgets steam power for 1700 years wasn't a lack of genius, it was a fire. A shipwreck, a library that didn't get recopied before the parchment rotted. Feel that for a second, sit in the silence of it, because it happened more than once, and the pattern gets bigger the closer you look. Roman concrete is where this stops being about one clever machine and starts being about an entire civilization's relationship to its own knowledge. You've probably heard that Roman concrete outlasts modern concrete. That's not an exaggeration. Modern reinforced concrete structures often show serious decay within 50 to 100 years. Roman harbor structures, built 2,000 years ago, sitting in seawater the entire time, are still standing. A geologist named Murray Jackson, working with samples from Roman piers, found the reason. Seawater seeping into the concrete over centuries reacts with a mineral component and actually grows new crystals inside existing cracks, sealing them from the inside. The concrete doesn't just resist damage, it heals as it ages. Modern concrete does the opposite. It gets weaker every year because it was never designed with that chemistry in mind. Jackson's team traced the reaction down to a rare mineral called aluminous taubamerite, forming slowly inside the concrete as seawater interacts with volcanic ash the Romans mixed into their mortar. Nobody in the first century had a name for that mineral. They just knew that ash from a particular stretch of coastline near Naples, mixed a particular way, made harbors that didn't fall apart. That's not luck repeated 100 times over 3 centuries of Roman construction. That's a formula held in someone's hands, passed down the way a recipe gets passed down. And like most recipes, never written in enough detail to survive their last cook, eventually just stopping. Here's the number, translated into something you can actually picture. If a modern parking garage aged the way Roman harbor concrete does, instead of crumbling and needing replacement within your own lifetime, it would still be standing, structurally sound, when your great-great-great-grandchildren are alive to see it. That's not a small engineering difference. That's the difference between a civilization building for a generation and a civilization building for forever. And once you know that, the small mysteries start looking less small. Across the old Roman frontier from Britain to Hungary, archaeologists keep digging up small bronze objects called Roman dodecahedra. 12-sided hollow shapes, each face a pentagon. Each corner a small sphere, each face a different sized hole cut through the middle. Over 100 of them have been found. Not one ancient text describes what they were for. No workshop record. No mention in any surviving Roman writing at all. Nobody knows. Not historians disagree in the vague way that phrase usually gets used. Actually, genuinely nobody knows. Candlestick holder, surveying tool, range finder for archers, knitting gauge for making gloves. Every explanation has a hole in it, and every dodecahedron found so far raises the same question the last one did. Here's the detail that makes it worse. These objects weren't cheap to make. Casting bronze into a hollow 12-sided shape with a different sized hole cut precisely through the center of each face takes real skill and real material cost. Whoever made this wasn't doodling. They were investing serious time in an object important enough to bury with the dead in some cases, valuable enough to hoard in others. And not one contemporary Roman writer, out of everything that survived from that empire, ever bothered to explain what it did. The silence itself is the loudest part of the story. So widen the frame with me for a second. An astronomical computer with no siblings. A steam engine that got written down and then quietly stopped mattering. A concrete formula that modern engineers are still trying to fully reverse engineer. A geometric object made over 100 times across 3 centuries, with its purpose never once recorded anywhere that survived. This isn't a story about one lost gadget. It's a story about how much of what an entire empire knew simply never made it out the other side. Now bring it home, because this isn't actually about Rome, it's about you. Think about how much of what you know right now exists in exactly one format, on exactly one platform backed up nowhere durable. Photos on a phone that could break tomorrow. Files in a cloud account tied to a company that might not exist in 20 years. Passwords, memories, entire family histories. Sitting in formats nobody's guaranteed to be able to open in 50 years, let alone 2000. You don't have to go back to Rome to see this pattern working in real time. NASA's own original video footage of the first moon landing sat on magnetic tapes that were, decades later, reportedly erased and reused because nobody flagged them as irreplaceable while there was still time to copy them properly. That happened in your lifetime's parent generation, with an institution built entirely around precision record keeping. Imagine how much less careful a single Roman workshop with one master craftsman and no formal archive at all would have been about writing anything down before he died. Rome didn't lack genius, Heron had it. Whoever built the Antikythera mechanism had it. The engineers who figured out self-healing seawater concrete had it. What they lacked was redundancy, enough copies, enough transmission, enough insurance against a single bad afternoon at a single library. One version of that knowledge sank in a shipwreck. Some of it burned. Some of it just stopped being copied by hand once the person who understood it died, and nobody thought to ask them to write down more before that happened. So you don't actually think Rome gave you straight roads and stone arches anymore. You think Rome gave you something closer to a warning, sealed in bronze gears and hardened seawater. That took 2,000 years and a group of sponge divers to finally start reading.